Good afternoon. Welcome to our very first webinar. My name's Catherine David. I'm your host today. I'm the head of the commercial partnerships team at the Fairtrade Foundation. So my job is to work with businesses across the UK to grow the market for Fairtrade products, but also to bring the farmer and worker voice into these industry discussions. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned all of our worlds upside down, but for smallholder farmers and workers, the impact has been particularly devastating. In East Africa, we've seen flour workers lose their jobs and their incomes overnight. And many farmers across the world are really struggling to keep their farms going, keep their families safe and fed. So they're facing the global health crisis, but farmers are also facing losing their livelihoods. Production, markets, logistics have all been severely disrupted. And we're also seeing prices for many products in freefall. So the sourcing decisions that businesses take at this time could not be more important. This is the moment we will find out how deep businesses' responsible sourcing values really go, and how hard we as the sector are willing to work to support the most vulnerable in our supply chains. So for today's session, we're going to be hearing from two really insightful panelists who are going to share their perspectives and their ideas about how to build a better food system, a better future. But you are all a key part of this conversation and architects of the solution. So please, let's make the most of this time together. We invite you to share your questions and your ideas in the chat box on the side. We will make sure we have time to focus on your questions, so please get involved. And you may even see your question or idea featured in our follow-up blogging. So we really commit to following up on what we discuss here today. To keep you on your toes, we're also going to pose some poll questions during today's session. And so to get you in the mood, here is our first poll. Hopefully that will pop up for all of you to answer. There we go. Today's session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording with you all afterwards and with everyone who registered. And just while you're filling in that poll, let me introduce our panelists. So on my virtual left, maybe be on your left, I don't know. On my virtual left, I'm delighted to introduce Marika. Marika is a banana farmer in the Dominican Republic. She's also a leader in the banana and fair trade community and chair of Fairtrade's producer network in Central South America and the Caribbean. And she's also a trustee of the Fairtrade Foundation. And on my virtual right is Louise Nichols. Many of you will know Louise from her years leading the human rights agenda at Marks and Spencer. Louise is now a leading thinker on sustainability and human rights and a driving force for food system change here in the UK. So welcome to all of you. So we're going to address the answers to the poll in a minute, but first to you, Marika. Farmers in Latin America and the Caribbean have been hard hit by the pandemic. Can you tell us a bit about what the situation is like right now for them?
Yes, well, definitely we need to say that farmers already before the COVID have been into crisis. The last decade of farming in Latin America have been a decade of climate change. And also in our principal products that are coffee and bananas, we have seen a drop in prices. So the consequence of this is that farmers went into COVID already in a very vulnerable situations. Many of them were already struggling with getting their household income through sales. In coffee, we have seen, and also in banana, that smallholders are selling the last 2-3 years below the cost of production, which have had a quite negative effect on productivity, also on externalities as environment and decent livelihoods. So that was like the starting situation of COVID. And through COVID that we are all in currently, and our country still are rising in cases, we have seen an increase in costs. For several reasons. Farmers are spending resources on protecting themselves, their family, and their workers. We're also working with less people, and older and persons with health problems are currently not working. We have seen our transport and logistics costs going up. Material packing in banana is not always available. Also inputs, agro inputs are not always available. So we are struggling in a quite different, already difficult situations where our farmers' income still is getting less and less. And on top of that, I think all of us are suffering quite some insecurity about what will happen. Will consumption change? Will we, after COVID, will the same trend we already have seen in the supply chain, will it go on, or will we all together, businesses, governments, and consumers, will we able to change it? Will we able to take more care of people and more care of the environment? Because definitely also coronavirus has shown us that if we take care of the environment, we can really repair many of the damages that we as humanity have caused to the environment. So there's an opportunity, but there is a lot of uncertainty on farmers' level currently.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just to ask you a bit more about life in the Dominican Republic and what your experience has been like at Banalino. How have you found things?
Well, this is more or less the experience of Banalino, with the exception that the Dominican Republic is very, very depending on value markets. So we always have tried to survive, maybe because we are an ACP country, in markets like organic market, like Fairtrade, because it has been the only market that really enables small farmers and small plantations, because we also have relatively small plantations, to be active in supply chains. So I think this is maybe for the DR, the future is even more uncertain. Also because of Brexit, because for us the UK is a very important market, and we definitely don't know still what will be the consequences for Brexit for the DR. So we have of crisis, and we are a very climate sensitive country. Mm-hmm. So climate change is a relatively high cost of production. Our cost of production and our financial cost is higher. So for the DR, the future will depend very much on if really the global supply chains are choosing for increasing their focus on sustainability. If not, many of the banana product producers already, through the last climate change that caused almost 50% of losses in production, are over their head into financial debt. They're trying to come back to the market. So I think the future is like a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. And some countries are worse off than others, but all of them are in a challenging situation.
And that's thank you very much, Marika. I know the Dom Rep has a very different set of circumstances and factors. Just before I move back to Louise, just interested, if you could say a bit more about what you know is going on in South America, and particularly with coffee farmers, because in the news today we see surging number of cases of coronavirus in Brazil, concerns in Colombia. What are you hearing from the coffee farmers in that region?
Coffee is like banana, no? Coffee, we know about the coffee crisis, we know about the climate change. Coffee have been struggling with coffee rust during the last decade. Many of these countries are in the same. They're in or coming out of coffee rust, and they're now into coronavirus. What I've heard from coffee is that from the one side, their sales have been affected. But from the other side, through wholesale and retail sale, they more or less have balanced their demand, but there has been a huge amount of challenge in logistics. Similar to bananas, also, I think all small farmers, we struggle a little bit with high risk, personal high risk, because in Latin America, farmers are above 55 and many times above 60. which put them in a high-risk category. Well, I think we are in a survival mode currently. But anyway, before the COVID, we already knew that we need to work very, very hard. Supply chains, governments, and also consumers need to be aware of it. We need to change trade. And Fairtrade have tried that during many, many, many years, I think with quite some impact, but not enough. We need to grow, we need to be bigger. It cannot just be on the Fairtrade agenda. So there is a call for change, and coffee and bananas, which is in coffee, we have 25 million people living out from coffee. So we already know that they sell below their cost of production, which will have really negative effects on their productivity, on their quality, and on their opportunity to survive. On the other hand, I think now the world needs to be very aware that all these farmers have been trying to serve consumers' interests. So I think an opportunity is that maybe we get a more awareness about the importance of family farming, not only in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, but also in Europe. Family farming means local, rural, and national development, and we need to take care of our farmers wherever they are. We need to take care of small businesses, because at the end, these are the businesses that keep economies running.
Thanks, Marika. Yeah, very interesting and wide-ranging, as I knew you would be, high level. But, you know, a picture of farmers and workers in survival mode was the phrase you used. And, you know, Louise, coming to you, that the poll that we just did suggests that businesses, by and large, are giving more or less the same amount of attention to their responsible sourcing. So 53% of our participants said about the same, 36% said more interest in responsible sourcing, and 12% less. So, you know, a pretty middling picture. Given what Marika has just said and the current crisis, what do you think businesses can do to live up to their responsible sourcing values?
Well, I think maybe we're going to hope that on this webinar we've got more of the responsible businesses than the average. I would have said that the most important thing is that businesses are genuinely operating responsibly, and that they're really thinking in two ways. Firstly, about the kind of short-term crisis management and about how to keep the cash flow going. But secondly, they're really thinking about how do they build back better. And I think absolute key to this is communication. And the first part is the internal communication. I'm really hoping that the responsible sourcing teams are working very closely with the buying teams to think about how they can mitigate the impacts of the pandemic and really make sure that they're not negatively impacting on them. Would be the first thing. I think it's absolutely key to think about how you collaborate with suppliers at this point, and to really think about making that about partnership. Really trying to understand what the issues look like for suppliers. How do we get to really understand what's happening for workers, what's happening for the local community? Can we make sure that we're really honouring our existing commitments and going above and beyond on that? And can we be as flexible as possible? Because what we know here is that people are in crisis and that supply chains won't be operating that effectively. And the worst thing that could happen is that the top of the supply chain sends a message of, you know, this is having negative impacts for us, quickly adjust and do something about it. Because what we know that does is put more pressure on and potentially causes even more vulnerability. So that's what we'll be really keen to prevent happening. I think there's some great examples of the supply chain going above and beyond, really thinking about how they help small and medium-sized suppliers to get access to the credit quicker. What we've seen with what you've done with the Fairtrade premium, changing the way that Fairtrade premium can be used to, again, make sure that it's really looking at the kind of cash issues as they are at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, cash is a really important piece here, right? Getting money into the pockets of people who need it when they need it, at that point.
Yeah.
Marika, from your kind of end of the supply chain, you've heard from Louise that there may be that kind of willingness of businesses here in the UK to support vulnerable farmers and workers at the other end of their supply chain. But how do you see that cash transfer working, and what are you seeing succeeding? I mean, Louise mentioned the Fairtrade premium, but are there other things or methods that you've seen work? And do you agree? Is that a key part of this challenge?
I think cash is, but more than cash, if we really calculate the extra cost because of COVID, and we recently did it in banana, these are millions and millions of dollars. So it's not just how can I best support. I think support is very much needed because it's a kind of moral measures of businesses that towards their producers and workers that they really care. So I think in time of where everybody tried to get the best out of a crisis where none of us is used to deal with this kind of situation, I think moral messages are very important. So it's very important that supply chain really are close to producers and workers and make sure producers and workers are aware of their value and they feel also valued in their struggle to keep on serving supply chains, no? But in bananas, we have seen that like an average extra cost due to COVID is like 78 cents a box. And we have been struggling the last 10 years to get it up 10 or 20 cents more. So I think expecting that businesses are willing or able, because I think also it's about if they really are, if the supply chain enable them to pay more. I think it will be very difficult. Having said that, small farmers and workers are very used to crisis. So even if I said we are in a survival mode, we have been in a survival mode many years. So in some way, we know how to deal with that. So I think one, moral support is very important. Two, making sure producers feel that there is and there will be a long-term commercial relationship, because I think this will help producers to deal with their uncertainty. And this is really, and also it help producers to feel more committed to being part of the supply chain. No? On the other hand, I think we need to also think about where's the coronavirus coming from. And what I've seen from the UN is that many of these kind of pandemics also come out of the way we deal with our environment. So this is what I see an opportunity. Climate change, deforestation, and even intensive agriculture take away the balance out of our ecosystem. So there is a way we can balance better our ecosystem. So there's an opportunity for the future to invest in the environment, to invest in people, and really to prevent another coronavirus that I think nobody is waiting for. But simply change the way we produce, change the way we consume, and change the way we trade. And also maybe trying to build more direct trade relationships so we can get more value into the production without that this mean talking about increasing prices. Because we also know that economies will not be as strong as they were before, and consumers will not have been the same budget. So we need to be very creative and smart to plan our future.
I mean, you talked about two things there. Your solidarity piece, extending solidarity to farmers and workers at this time, but also long-term contracts as one way that businesses can help support their farmers and workers. Louise, I mean, it feels like a message of solidarity might be one of those easy wins that businesses in the UK can share with their farmers and workers and producers, but may not occur to them as being of value. But long-term contracts, I can imagine there may be some barriers to that from a business perspective. What is your sense of what those barriers might be, and how some of our attendees might work to overcome those?
I think let's be honest, what the pandemic has done has really shown the fragility of supply chains. And we saw it with the very initial moment its outbreak. The outbreak has happened in different countries. That kind of short-term supply shock and kind of the difficulty of getting stock to the right place at the right time. And what we're going to see over the next 12 months is the impact of labour shortages, and what that does in terms of those very big harvests, in terms of whether or not all the crop gets harvested and what impacts that makes on supply. So I would expect that the conversations that will be happening in businesses will be to think much more about crisis management. How do we actually build thinking about this into our long-term planning? How do we think about the way we think about our supply chains in terms of how we build resilience, not just resilience to food security, but really think about how we build back better. And I absolutely agree with Marika. That has to be about linking environment and social and economic together, not seeing them as separate issues, because that's going to be vital if we're to deliver this properly. I mean, I think what has been shown by the reality of the coronavirus, I think for a lot of people who maybe hadn't quite got it, was the link between health and the environment. And, be it the way that you might have looked at how the coronavirus is proportionally affecting people who are obese or who are malnourished. So you're actually thinking about the way people consume, or whether or not you're looking at the linkage between the encroachment into the natural forests and the population growth and the link that's having to these viruses ending up in jumping between animals and then into humans. I think people are seeing some of that connection. I think also the reality of lockdown for many has enabled them to see the impact of when humans have less impact on the environment, how much nature comes back. And I think for many that connection will be something they want to see going forward, how are businesses actually thinking about that social environment and economic linkages.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I sort of wonder, a lot of the pre-pandemic, one of the key pre-pandemic drivers for businesses working in sustainable source, responsible sourcing was also around the human rights agenda. I know this is an area that you've been very deeply involved in, Louise. And I wonder how you see that playing into this picture. I mean, firstly, in the in this crisis management phase, as you call it, will that be high up businesses' list, trying to make sure that human rights are protected in their supply chains even through this crisis? And do you anticipate that being something that is difficult to sustain, the kind of standards and approaches that we've learned to expect?
I think we can see it if we look just at the way some of the businesses responded in the moment of outbreak, between those businesses that actually took care of their employees and their suppliers, and those who kind of cut and burned both their own employees, but also their supply chain. And at the heart of that is that if you've got a human rights approach, you are thinking about where are the vulnerable people in your employment and in your supply chain. And that's what human rights lens is about. And Marika did a brilliant job of explaining some of that vulnerability when we look into the supply chain that we need to be thinking about. And at the heart of the UN guiding principles, it's really clear. It is absolutely the state's responsibility to put in place those safety measures in the case of the outbreaking of the pandemic, and making sure there's access to healthcare and the income support. But as we know, in so many of the countries we're choosing to source from, there is not that government capability in place. And therefore, the responsibility under the UN guiding principles is that business has a responsibility to respect human rights. And at the heart of that respecting human rights is about acting responsibly. It's about continuing to trade. And where states are failing, it's even more important that businesses honour those commitments and they continue to trade and support and keep that cash flow going, enable people to stay in jobs and to be in jobs where they're properly protected and kept safe. And I think that's at the heart of what human rights is about. And I think, what will the world post-COVID look like? What I really hope it will do is it will be much better at holding businesses to account, that don't honour those kind of basic human rights commitments. And I think we're seeing that in terms of some of the benchmarks. We're seeing that in the World Benchmarking Alliance that's come out with an even more detailed version of social indicators that they're going to be putting 2,000 businesses through. So we will expect to see better transparency, looking at what businesses are doing. And what we're looking for is businesses that have purpose, who've genuinely not just greenwash purpose, but have taken that and made it part of the core of how they do business. And those are the businesses that we know are going to be much more stronger and resilient as we go forward in a world that's going to have much more shocks. And you can see that if you look at the economic performance of those businesses with better ESG performance, they are much more resilient and they're better for investment. And so I think part of it's about how do we create more incentives in the market to reward those businesses who along their supply chain genuinely embed ESG approach.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Louise. And I'm going to bridge into one of the questions from the chat box in a second. So keep the chat questions coming in. But Marika, anything you'd like to add on that topic of human rights at this point? And I guess from your end of the supply chain, do you see a divergence between those businesses in this crisis really trying to safeguard and protect human rights and those who maybe don't have that such a priority? Is that something that you recognise?
Sorry, I was in mute. I think human rights needs we need to deal with human rights thinking from a very long-term perspective. And first of all, human rights not only can be secured by businesses. It needs businesses, governments, and producer organizations' involvement. So I think the most relevant for me to really tackle human rights, that we know we have challenges, and the challenges are even public. We know we have child labor in coffee. We know we have migrant issues in the Dominican Republic. We know we have issues that need to be tackled and affect or cause potential human rights violation in supply chains. So, but these issues only can be tackled if businesses, governments, and producers themselves work together in solving, preventing, mitigation, and even remediation of human rights violations. And for me, and I think also Fairtrade is working on it, the most relevant issue is that we achieve a bottom-up approach. So we need to talk with producers, we need to talk with workers. Also producers and workers need to be open and transparent about the risk they personally believe they face, without expecting that this can cause any disruption in the supply chain. So I think transparency is key. We know about the risk, but we don't know about the degree of the risk we have in supply chains. So I think working on the bottom-up approach, sitting down with producers and workers, listening to producers and workers, what are their real risks, also making producers and workers aware what human rights are, because many businesses know, consumers in the north know, but producers, some relations are simply daily reality. Like children in our countries are maybe born with the machete in their hands. That is like what's the translation of machete?
Machete, yeah.
Okay, and not necessarily producers think this is the forced labor, but we know it's forced labor, and it's high risk. So I think this kind of awareness about what are human rights, and then making producers and workers aware that involving them in a risk assessment, but also involving them in solutions, for me it's key. And I believe what the government regulation is an opportunity, business really commitment to human rights is an opportunity, fair trade commitment to human rights is an opportunity. So it's an opportunity to work in a connected supply chain and find the solutions. But this also needs long-term commercial relationship and supply chain investments. Because cut and run won't really solve the real human rights issues we face in our countries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marika. And I think I want to move us on to one of the key drivers for some of those business commitments, which is, of course, the consumer angle. I've got a question here from Andrew Denham-Smith. So thank you, Andrew. Does the panel think the new normal will increase or decrease consumer ethical sourcing expenditure? Jacob, if you wouldn't mind popping in the poll that we had on that, because I'd be interested to see what our attendees think about consumer attitudes to responsible sourcing in the light of this pandemic. But Louise, interested in your take on this while we wait for people to give their views. In your opinion, what do we like to see from consumers? Can we learn anything from the last global recession? Will consumers hold on to their values? At Fairtrade, we've seen some research that suggests that people still care a lot about fair trade. 75% of people still saying they really care about it, but this is a very sort of short-term read. What's your prediction?
I think the really interesting thing is, really coronavirus has changed the way we work. It's changed the way we communicate and shop more than any other disruption, at least in this decade, if not longer. And I think for many, that's going to last much longer. The view is things that whether or not the risk goes away in terms of the immediate risk to the disease, I think it's going to change in people's mind for a lot longer, that nervousness about whether or not I can, I want to go to a crowded space. And therefore, the view is that it will change people's shopping habits. We're already seeing that in China, since the lockdown has ceased, people have continued with the online shopping, that the shopping habits are different. When people are going in to shop, they're shopping in a very efficient manner, much less dwell time at looking at labeling. They're shopping less often, they're shopping in higher quantities. They've also changed the balance of what they're shopping. So they're shopping to cook more at home and to enjoy that kind of understanding more about food and the provenance of food. We've seen that organic sales have gone up slightly as well. People are really interested in the integrity of where things come from. And there's definitely for some people more of that link towards wanting to buy local. And wanting to buy from people that they really trust. In some ways, I think this brings real opportunity for fair trade. This is going to be about transparency, traceability, authenticity. And I think that gives a real opportunity to fair trade who've got the long tentacles of networks down into supply chains to really understanding producers and being able to share those producer stories. So I think the opportunity could look good for fair trade.
And I mean, the poll results that have come in from our crowd here, 39% of people think consumers will care more about responsible sourcing, 23% less, and same 38%. So a sort of split picture there. I guess time will tell. There are so many questions coming through, but Marika, I think one that people will be interested to hear more from you around is you mentioned about needing more direct trade relationships. And Meg Jones has put a question in around that, and whether you can say a bit more about what kind of relationships between buyers and sellers you have in mind. Fewer intermediaries, is that what you're thinking? More transparency? And I think connected to that, there was a question around whether fair trade should be doing more to support diversification of production and the creation of local regional markets, and that could be another way of reducing fragility and precariousness of these supply chains. Interested to hear your thoughts on that, and if you can, relatively quickly.
Well, it's the whole
complex topic.
Yes. Well, in the supply chain, definitely we know there is a limited value in the supply chain. There's also limited strength or opportunities to increase prices at a level that we probably need to reach living income and living wage for farmers and workers. So one of the solution and opportunities could be creating more direct relationship with producers' organizations themselves. So taking away some of the so needed intermediaries, because one of the strengths I think we have as Fairtrade, that we strengthen organizations to be able to trade their product directly. So this could be an opportunity so we can get more value into the producers. Another opportunity, and definitely I think this is, it's not one action, it's a mix of action we need to do. We need to get more crop diversification in smallholder farms, so they are not only depending on cash crop, they should also produce part of their food. They should produce also crops that they can sell in local markets. So this is an opportunity to get more income in the farm, but also an opportunity to walk away from monoculture and have a more diverse farming environment where we get more a natural balance in the soil. And we also improve our soil health that we already know is key for climate change and sustainable farming. So I think a smart mix would say so. Yes to diversification, yes to the development of southern markets, hopefully ethical markets, because there we are relatively weak in the south. So there's an opportunity to create more ethical awareness in consumers and introduce concepts as fair trade and organic, and make this an opportunity for farmers to be part of different supply chains.
And those are exciting concepts. And Louise, I've got a quick last one for you before we start wrapping up. And it's come from Savita, so thank you, Savita. Do you think, honestly now, tell us the truth, post-pandemic, are businesses going to be dropping really their social environmental efforts and focusing on economic recovery at all costs? Is this a survival game now for business, or do you think by and large that businesses will recognise the imperative of building back better and more resilient supply chains? What's your sense?
Well, I think there'll be some who absolutely are on the part of building back better. But I mean, I think this is where we know that we need better legislation. And I think we've seen that with all the cocoa manufacturers coming out and saying, actually, we want mandatory human rights due diligence. I think that's going to be absolutely key. It is going to be about helping consumers to do the right thing. And therefore, I think, consumer campaigns, and I think, the use of consumer apps to kind of get consumers to really understand that they are voting every day with every purchase that they make. And maybe in a world where there's more online buying, there's actually more opportunity to help people with tech to understand, the proportion of their purchasing that they're doing the right thing with. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to use these opportunities. I think absolutely key now is to move to doubling down on collaboration. And I think one of the interesting opportunities is to look at the public-private partnerships that are happening in cocoa and say, how can you replicate this in other commodities? Because that's what we need to do here, is that we know all this siloed effort is having a limited impact. This should be the decade of action. How do we really step it on?
Yeah, your choice is your vote. Choose the world you want. I'm gonna ask our panelists in a second to share one thing that you're hopeful about and one thing that you're worried about as your final comment. So have a think about that. Whilst Jacob, please, could you pop up the last poll for us? This final poll question is really to help us. This is the first of our series of webinars that we're running to explore the impact of the pandemic, but also to explore what it takes to build a fairer food system and finally crack some of these long-standing wicked issues. So your input today is really going to help us shape that conversation. Louise, back to you while people are thinking that. One thing that brings you hope and one worry you have, and you can do them the other way around maybe. That would be a more hopeful way to end.
I think my worry at the moment is the lack of oversight in supply chains and that we're not hearing the voices of the most vulnerable. But my Hope is that it feels like a world where people want to stand up for what they care about, and that gives me hope that with doubling down on collaboration, we can really move the dial.
Very inspiring. And Marika, one worry and one hope from you?
One worry would be that we just take up the economy as it was before, that there will be no change. That would be my main worry. And my hope would be that this coronavirus had taught us that only working together we can find the right solutions for very challenging issues as human rights and the environment. So my hope is that businesses and producers will work very strong together to find solutions for global issues that nobody alone can solve. So my hope would be stronger long-term relationship built on mutual trust and really able to tackle issues that have been on the global agenda for many, many years.
Thank you for that, Marika. Thank you, Louise. And thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We're out of time, so we'll wrap up now. But thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us in the conversation. Please follow us on LinkedIn, hear about our future events, and we're going to be following up on the topics that you've raised in the questions and on the topics discussed today to keep this conversation going. We look forward to working with all of you to build a fairer future. So thanks for your support and vote with your choices. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Catherine. Bye.
Bye.